Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint by Sing Shong. Chapter 328. God's Enemy. Part 1. The Star Stream has confirmed the possibility of a new giant story. The interpretation of old stories is possible. The characters who appeared in the myth are reconstructed. Based on past myths, stage transformation will occur. After seeing the indirect messages popping up one after another, the great Dakibi Noxu was silent. Originally, the 60th scenario Gigantomachia wasn't relayed by the Dakibis. They only had channel and airing rights, while the actual progress was done by the sub-heroes of Olympus. However, the situation had changed. There was an explosion on the screen and roars as the giants emerged from the ground. Where the hell did the giants appear from? The underworld. What is going on in the underworld? Shouldn't they be trapped in the underground prison? Now Gigantomachia was a completely different story. Who will relay it? Noxu turned and asked two advanced Dakibi. I'll do it. No, I will. They were the director of the Korean branch Baihyung and the director of the Japanese branch Dokgak. The two gazes met and currents filled the air. Dokgak exclaimed, "Great Dakibi! Baihyung can't do this. He has been broadcasting Incarnation Kim Dokja for too long. I'm familiar with him, so I can broadcast it better. In addition, since when will you still call him Incarnation? He is a constellation." On the screen, the incarnations of Kim Dokja's company were seen fighting the heroes. Their appearance of taking precise formations and releasing their status was reminiscent of glittering constellations centered on a single star. The sound of chewing popcorn was heard from somewhere. Very noisy. Do Dakibis normally talk like this? The red wine in the glass was sucked into the man's mouth. Then one of the heroes of Olympus died on the screen. The constellation God of Wine and Ecstasy is cheering. The constellation God of Wine and Ecstasy has sponsored 3,000 cons to the Demon King of Salvation. At this absurd sight, Baihyung asked, "Aren't you a member of Olympus? Can you be sitting her leisurely? What do you know? I'm not really close to them. In addition, aren't you the ones who said I can take a tour today?" Like any cheerer on the street, Dionysus had a flag with his team on his back. The flag was covered with "Olympus is doomed." Dokgak's eyes narrowed. The 12 gods of Olympus would have gathered at Olympus Temple by now. I want Kim Dokja to win. Huh? The Dakibis were in an uproar from the remark that was like a bomb. Dionysus laughed heartily. What are you so surprised? I can support anyone. In addition, you shouldn't react like this. Don't you only need a fun scenario? It was true, making the Dakibis frown at the words. Dokgak opened his mouth. The thing you are expecting won't happen. Dokgak's words caused Baihyung's expression to darken. In fact, Kim Dokja's company fighting against Olympus was ridiculous. Breaking a rock with a quail egg had more of a chance than this. In addition, it overlapped with the Earth's side. Baihyung watched Gigantomachia with one eye while the other saw Yu Jonghyuk running with Lee Sukyung on his back. At this moment, Dionysus opened his mouth again. It is unknown if the story is a tragedy or a comedy until this is over. Isn't it obvious? Gigantomachia is such a scenario. Gigantomachia is just one of the many giant stories that Olympus had. You might belittle them as long as they're not there, but you can't afford to overlook the lucky punch. The probability of it happening is close to 0%. That probability will happen. Isn't that why I'm here? Dionysus watched the screen while shoving popcorn in his mouth. The key is, how to make the dizzy fish come out. More than half of the 12 gods had gathered. They were in the form of symbolic objects that represented themselves. The first one to speak was a trident. The distinguished lightning throne didn't come this time, and Dionysus is missing? That's correct. The waters around the temple boiled up like the sea was furious. Some symbolic bodies looked at each other nervously, and the trident kept speaking. Then why did the giants wake up again? It is a group that broke out from Tartarus. The one who answered with a constellation with the symbol of a pair of swords. The trident asked again, Hades let them go? It was said they performed the myth ritual. The myth ritual? They must have sacrificed a great probability. Did everybody's mother wake up? No. It was the 3 Centimanes brothers who moved. All 3 of them went out? It is Briareus alone. It is said he lost half his 100-handers. They were probably lacking probability for all 3 to leave. It was silent. Then the blazing sun spoke, we can't sit idly by. Gigantomach's company? The small nebula is provoking us. We need to severely punish them. Then a winged shoe with numerous data windows around it spoke. It won't be easy. Like the 3 chiefs, the master of the nebula has received the indication of the end. Hint. Is that true, Hermes? Yes. It is funny. The master of the nebula is building a story on the same level as the lightning throne? There was a stir in the group. A single story was a sensitive topic for the 12 gods. The constellations were all seeking the ultimate story. There was no one who wasn't interested in the hint of the end. It was the trident who arranged things. Quiet. Everyone is busy, and there is a lot of work to do. We will start the vote. Everyone in the place fell silent. The reason why so many gods gathered was due to the 60th scenario. In response to the provocation of Gigantomach's company, I, as chairman, am calling for the deployment of the story weapon. Then the voting began. The constellation god of marriage and the home declares abstention. The constellation organizer of agriculture and the seasons declares neutrality. The constellation spokesman of justice and wisdom declares that we must withdraw the justice the humans don't know about. The constellation atrocious war god wants to fight the giants. The constellation almighty sun wants to burn a petty nebula. The constellation volcanic blacksmith wants to make a weapon to fight against the giants. The constellation pure hunter of the moonlight rejects a meaningless war. The constellation goddess of love and beauty says she will abstain from this superficial vote. The constellation master of the skywalk says the issue shouldn't be approached so simple. The big data should be examined, the nature of the case reviewed, and the patterns of the enraged giants. Hermes, just say it. The constellation master of the skywalk is against the war. Several constellations were surprised by the declaration. You are a coward, Hermes. He always goes against the will of the temple. Hermes didn't say anything. Meanwhile, the result of the votes came up. Agree, 4 votes. Disagree, 2 votes. Abstain, 3 votes. There was only one last vote left. Of course, it was the chairman's vote. The constellation spear that parts the boundaries of the sea is demanded the release of the weapon. Agree, 5 votes. All seats have voted apart from the non-attendees. The gods nodded. Apart from those who abstained, more than half are in favor, and I am declaring the release of this story weapon. A hammering sound rang through the temple while an ominous foam rose from the sea. The direction of the foam was the theme park Gigantomachia, where the giants were gathering. We need a commander to lead the weapons. The great constellations will go together, but they can't deal with the giants alone. Who will you send? I will approve some gods to move. You will be in an incarnation body, and I hope you assist them without hesitation. Then somebody raised their hand. I will go. After Achilles' incarnation body collapsed, the incarnations fell into panic. Several incarnations fled when they saw the mountains of giants rising everywhere. In the chaos, several incarnations shouted, "Why are you doing this? You! What the hell is this?" The astonishment and resentment of the incarnations were soon directed towards me. I asked in return, "Why are you doing what? What did I do? We missed the chance to get a star relic because of you. It was a chance to get a story about catching a giant. I was going to catch the eyes of the 12 gods and join Olympus. Now because of you. Gigantomachia. With a participation fee of 100,000 coins, they got a chance to gain hidden pieces, and if lucky, a piece of a giant story. That opportunity was now disappearing into a handful of dust in front of their eyes. I watched the incarnations and wondered, do you really think that Gigantomachia is such a naive event? Perhaps they were right. There actually were incarnations and constellations who were strengthened through Gigantomachia. In addition, many of them likely became members of Olympus. Let's say you join Olympus. Then what will you do? What? In a nebula already occupied by the 12 gods and the ancient constellations, what can you do? Through ways of survival, I saw the words of countless incarnations who had joined Olympus. The incarnations were bound by unusual contracts and collected crude stories as they were used in the long term for various scenarios. All the incarnations of last year's Gigantomachia climbed to the top scenario. They. Are you talking about them? The people turned their heads in the direction I pointed. There were countless ships crossing the sea, including Argo. Among the ship's passengers, the participants of last year's Gigantomachia were also seen. Why are they? Gigantomachia. The myths recorded it as a fight between the giants and the gods and heroes of Olympus. However, most incarnations weren't aware of how the heroes who participated in the war were made. Many constellations are excited. The gods were afraid of the giants and mass-produced heroes from humans for Gigantomachia. The constellations of the nebula Olympus are showing hostility towards you. Even after the end of Gigantomachia, it was unknown how many incarnations were being mobilized for this reenactment war. It was a scenario that ate and produced itself, like a snake biting its own tail. A number of constellations have entered the channel. A large number of constellations can't hide their excitement for Gigantomachia. The constellations who hated the scenario reached the end of the scenario and enjoyed the scenario. They desperately climbed the ladder of the scenario, mocked the incarnations, and kicked the ladder towards the top. The victim of the tragedy became the subject of the tragedy. I declared towards the horror-stricken incarnations. I want to break the scenario. Chapter 329. God's Enemy. Part 2. Break the scenario? What are you saying? The people made expressions that showed they didn't understand. It was natural. There was no way they thought they could break the scenario. The scenario had become a condition of life for them. You are a splendid constellation. Do you think you can contend with Olympus? I turned after hearing someone's voice and saw a familiar big man. He had a bushy beard and held a long spear. It was a constellation I knew. That's right. Quahahat. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask for your name. I am the Demon King of Salvation. Demon King of Salvation. Some of the incarnations and constellations who heard my modifier immediately responded. Is it the Demon King's selection? The Demon King who knocked down Surya. The man with the big spear came forward and said, I am called Protector of Changban. Protector of Changban. It is Zhang Fei. Zhang Fei struck his massive chest. I want to help you. I didn't want to play this childish game, but now I'm getting heated up. He threw away the items harvested from Olympus theme park. It was the head of a young hydra, a golden apple, and fake golden fleece. I nodded and said, good. If Zhang Fei had this equipment, he would definitely be a big power. However, it wasn't enough. The hidden scenario myth subversion has affected the main scenario. I glanced around at the other incarnations and constellations and stated, now, choose. The incarnations looked between me, the terrible giants, and Argo, crossing the sea. Do you want to be stuck to the back of a giant nebula and be their limbs for a lifetime? Or do you want to be the master of a new myth along with the mythical giants? The contents of the main scenario that you and your nebula received will be updated. Main scenario number 60, Gigantomachia. Category, Main. Difficulty level, SSS+. Clear conditions, the ancient giants have come to the Gigantomachia battlefield. You can join the battlefield by taking the side of the giants or Olympus. Cut the neck of the enemy leader and declare the advent of a new myth to the star stream. Time limit. Compensation, a new giant story? Failure, partial disappearance of the giant story. If the enemy's incarnation body is destroyed, the corresponding scenario will end. Each faction has 2 leaders. The moment the scenario updated, a green arrow flashed over my head. You already belong to a force. You are one of the 2 leaders in charge of the giant forces. The incarnations around me were silent. They had probably received the updated scenario. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband is delighting in this spectacle. The constellation Abyssal Black Flame Dragon is delighting in your suffering. The constellation Secretive Plotter is wondering about your strategy. Then the bombardment started from the sea. Han Suyang's voice was heard behind me. Kim Dokja. How long are you going to stand there? Do you want to just watch? I drew my sword and descended from the shoulder of a giant. Let's start. How are we going to fight? Our power is overwhelmingly lacking. Han Suyang's words were true. I wouldn't say it was overwhelming, but less than 10 giants had passed through the portal with me. Furthermore, Briareus of the Centimanes was a core power, but he hadn't yet appeared on the field. Perhaps he was the other leader. Kill the giants. A true voice emerged from somewhere, and the human heroes leapt from Argo to attack the giants. The stage transformation of Gigantomachia is occurring. There were sparks, and the surroundings changed. The ancient battlefield. It was the land of massacre where the first Gigantomachia occurred. The constellations of Olympus came flying through the air. Most of them were great grade, but once they joined forces and attacked the giants, the situation suddenly tilted. The supreme giants will kneel down to the combined forces of the heroes and gods. The giants were kneeling down one by one before the combined efforts of the constellations and heroes. My group tried to help the giants, but we were blocked by the shells coming from the sea. Li Hyunsung exclaimed, I think we have to do something about that story weapon. The story weapon, Argo. The ship of the Olympus heroes was launching shells that contained enormous magic power. It was difficult to even approach the sea. Of course, it was expected. Have you forgotten who we have? I stared at a girl standing among the party members. Me? To be exact, I looked at the constellation behind Li Jiahai. The constellation Maritime War God is looking at you. Li Jiahai shouted, Are you crazy? You want me to deal with that? Olympus Argo was much bigger than Li Jiahai's ghost fleet. It was the size difference between a patrol ship and a destroyer. It was natural to think it was impossible. You can do it. I knew. Li Jiahai could indeed do it. You can definitely do it if you are with your sponsor. As the constellations of the Korean peninsula watched, the maritime war god was looking up at the sky. A constellation who had been confined to the Korean peninsula for a long time. He had to carry the name of the country on his back. The constellation who had to remain a symbol of the nation he dedicated his life to. One day, Goryeo first sword had said, among the great constellations of the Korean peninsula, only the Duke of Loyalty and Warfare can compete with me. Then why did Sun Sin remain at the great grade despite Goryeo's first sword become a narrative grade constellation? The constellation Maritime War God is looking at his fellow people. It was because he refused to be narrative grade. The constellation Coaeil Pil wants Maritime War God to fight for himself. It was the moment when a great grade constellation became narrative grade. The moment when a single constellation left his nation and moved towards his own path. A dazzling radiance emerged from Li Jiahai's body. The constellation Maritime War God is opening his status. The Duke of Loyalty and Warfare released himself, as if revealing everything about him. The star stream is staring at the constellation Maritime War God. The sky of the scenario looked down at the Duke of Loyalty and Warfare. Like a seasoned actor who had been hiding his capabilities, the Duke of Loyalty and Warfare under the sky was magnificent and bold. It was a spirit that didn't retreat or feel fear. Many constellations are surprised by the status of the maritime war god. After a long time, the Duke of Loyalty and Warfare was finally leaving the Korean peninsula. The star stream has accepted the promotion of maritime war god. The constellation Maritime War God has become a narrative-grade constellation. Jihei. The opening of Gigantomachia started with the promotion of the Sea Admiral. Smash it all. Lee Jihei was surrounded by the spirit of the Maritime War God and raised her sword. The character Lee Jihei has activated the Stigma Ghost Fleet LV-10. The status of the sponsor has risen and the destructive power of the Ghost Fleet is rising rapidly. 12 ships appeared at the shoreline. The ships had already grown to the size of a destroyer. Those who seek death shall live. Those who seek life shall die. The cannons of the 12 ships fired simultaneously. The number of enemy shells that never ceased firing slowly started to change. The front of Argo was crumbling. The number of shells dropped sharply and there was the sound of the hull exploding. The solid Argo was shaking. We equipped ourselves to defend against the shells and moved our feet. We cut down the Olympians running towards the giants and moved forward. Maybe they thought this couldn't continue anymore and the heroes of Argo came out. Everybody land. The intense true voice was heard from Argo's expedition leader, Wind Expedition King. Argo Expedition Leader, Jason. The giants can't stop humanity and gods from joining together. The winner of this war is already fixed. The army poured out along with this shout. I took the lead while speaking to the faltering group members. There is no need to be afraid. We aren't giants. We weren't giants. In other words, stage transformation didn't have an influence on us. The large Jason came this way and a man on our side ran towards him. I'll take this big one. It was Lee Hyunsung. Lee Hyunsung collided with Jason with a tremendous amount of force and bellowed as they had a battle of strength. Hey up! Jason was surprised by the tremendous strength that forced him to be pushed back. In the latter half of Ways of Survival, Lee Hyunsung wasn't pushed by an incarnation or constellation in strength. Coordination with the constellation Master of Steel has increased. Lee Hyunsung's upper body was covered by a shell of steel. The level of Lee Hyunsung's steel transformation was extremely high. His body wasn't touched at all, despite being punched by a hero. In the sky, Shin Yusung and Lee Gilyung were flying on the dragon. Shin Yusung avoided the heroes with dragon-slaying stories and fired a breath. The sea was instantly poisoned and the enemies were cut by Lee Gilyung's insect kings. Lee Sealwa used poison against the heroes while Han Suyung used the black flames and blocked the constellations of Olympus. Now they all had the ability to deal with great constellations. The 10 or so nebula members were fighting against the constellations of a mighty nebula. The incarnations observing the situation in the back were shocked. What? Olympus seems to be pushed by that small nebula? This was the effect I had intended. The battle was still in its infancy. I had to appeal with strength to bring in reinforcements. However, the god of victory still wasn't on our side. It finally appeared. I looked at the 20 meters high monster filling my field of view. It wasn't a human, no matter how I looked. Gleaming golden armor. A cloak made of lion leather wrapped around it. Those who knew Greek mythology couldn't not know his name. Some of the giants shrieked at the majestic appearance. Hercules. The hero status, that even the 12 gods were reluctant to go against, dominated the entire battlefield. I looked up as a dark shadow covered the surrounding area and smiled bitterly. If I wanted to deal with this monster, then I had to call a monster as well. It took me so long to get here. Naturally, I wouldn't withdraw from here. The sword designed to cut a sleeping giant. I quietly stated. Now, descend upon this place. Come, Kim Namwon. Chapter 330. God's Enemy. Part 3. A swirling portal appeared in the sky. The constellation, Queen of the Darkest Spring, is looking at you. Pluto's license was obtained from Hades. I could use Pluto freely in the limited time Gigantomachia was held. Ha ha ha, Grasshopper Man. You memorized the starting change despite not liking it? It was Kim Namwon's mischievous voice. However, the giant soldier didn't appear immediately. There was only the darkness of the abyss visible beyond the swirling portal. By the way, can you wait 10 minutes? The summoning circle is damaged and I can't go straight away. The giants stomped their feet too many times. Damn it. Heracles was emitting a white light and looking my way with blank eyes. TL, small change from Hercules in the last chapter. It couldn't be helped. I had to buy as much time as possible. I stepped forward and shouted, Heracles. Hero of the 12 tasks. Heracles stared at me. The red arrow above Heracles' head was flickering. The constellation is a leader of Olympus. As expected, he was one of the 2 leaders of Olympus. According to the myths, Heracles was a man who killed the leader of the giants in Gigantomachia. Many constellations and ways of survival spoke about him. As long as Heracles is present, the winner of Gigantomachia won't change. Numerous incarnations cheered when they saw Heracles. Oh! Heracles! Heracles! Heracles, the hero of Olympus, who left countless myths and folklore. Despite the many stories that resonated through the star stream, the number of constellations who actually saw Heracles could be counted on one hand. He was a demigod, a mix between a god and human. He had a body of steel. The stories of the protector of Olympus circulated around him. The storied man who strangled the lion of Nemea has begun. The storied man who beat up the giant boar has begun. The storied man who overpowered a Cerberus with bare hands has begun. A tremendous amount of stories were shining in Heracles' body. At first glance, they seemed like crazy stories. Every one of them was at the very least, legendary grade stories. The scale of his giant stories was incomparable, but I didn't start the game without knowing this. Once again, rumors in the star stream can't be believed. I spoke in a provocative voice, and Heracles' fist flew towards me. The exclusive skilled bookmark is activated. Miniaturization and electrification were activated. Heracles' fist passed over the top of my head and made a crater in the ground where I had been standing. I was swept back by the ignorant power, but I didn't stop the provocation. Your punch is only this much. I don't know if this was enough to overpower the giants. An angry cry seemed to burst from Heracles' body. I know many stories about you. You caught the lion of Nemea, killed a hydra, hunted a stymphalian bird. They are incredible stories for one person to accomplish in a short period of time. Finally, a true voice burst out from Heracles' body. That's right. That is me, Heracles. It was creepy hearing the voice. It might be equivalent to the 12 gods, but as a result, I was even more convinced. I heard a rumor that you were born for Gigantomachia. Your 12 tasks were trials for the victory of Gigantomachia. Some constellations are interested in your words. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire is worried about you. I didn't know how he took my words, but Heracles banged on his chest. It was a spectacular sight to see a monster over 20 meters tall doing such a thing. I kept speaking. Then one of my close colleagues heard your story and raised a question. I suppressed my boiling anger. The original Heracles was born after the Great Disaster period. Then how could he participate in Gigantomachia, which occurred before that? It was none other than Usanga who said this. A stir occurred among the constellations in the channel. Heracles' eyes gleamed angrily as his true voice rang out. Arrogant guy. Are you saying this Heracles is a lie? Yes. Not just you, but all of the 12 gods. Heracles was silent at my answer. You made many false stories. You did this by manipulating them. Heracles clearly looked embarrassed. I was surprised as well. If you kept talking and talking nonsense, it might someday become a real story. 1,000 years, 2,000 years. The lies were repeated for tens of thousands of years. Once it becomes a story, it can be said to originally exist. Isn't it amazing? I am Heracles. Heracles of Gigantomachia and the symbol of Olympus. Yes, perhaps in another world line. Somewhere in another world, you really killed Nemea's lion and the Hydra. The constellation Secretive Plotter is making an interested smile. I stared up at the sky as I spoke. I moved through the 1863rd round and remembered the countless rounds that Yu Jonghyuk went through. However, that isn't the case in this world. In this world, a hero like Heracles doesn't exist. It is because Heracles is the name of the story weapon you created. Zeus, the god of lightning, had sowed his seed in preparation for Gigantomachia. As always, the seed here was a metaphor. Zeus feared the giants and collected miscellaneous hero stories from across the world. Nemea's lion, golden horned deer, bull of Crete, hydra of 9 heads. Stories were gathered and created a single character. This character was soon shaped into a story weapon. It was created to fight against the giants, using human souls as power. A weapon that brought the fear of massacre to numerous battlefields in the star stream. Giant soldier Heracles. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband is surprised. The constellation Bald General of Justice resents the atrocities of Olympus. The constellation Queen of the Darkest Spring has a cold expression. The constellation Spokesman of Justice and Wisdom has shaky eyes. Many constellations are shocked by the identity of Heracles. Perhaps most constellations were unaware of this story. It was natural. It was a truth that only I, who read Ways of Survival, and a few of the 12 gods who made Heracles knew about. Many constellations have entered channel #BY9158. The constellations in the channel suddenly increased and Bayu cried out tearfully. A large number of constellations are questioning the identity of Gigantomachia. The stage I wanted was finally going to be completed. Heracles' mythical identity is shaken. The identity of Heracles has influenced the reproduction of stage transformation. I stared at Heracles. The exclusive skill Reading Comprehension is activated. You have learned about the other person's composition of stories due to the attribute effect. He is a god of war born only for war. Holding fear in the right hand and anxiety in the left hand. He left discord every time he walked through a fight in front of him. The stories of a constellation flowed through Heracles' giant soldier. They weren't Heracles' stories. Heracles was a giant soldier. If so, there was someone riding him and I knew who that person was. I cried out in my true voice. Atrocious war god. Are you a coward who fights behind a giant soldier? A huge storm of wind blew around Heracles' body. The heroes and constellations fighting in a bloody manner around him were pushed back dozens of meters. I would have flown to the horizon if I hadn't used Way of the Wind through bookmark. Ares opened his mouth. In the past, many people who spoke bad words to Olympus didn't have a good fate. Oedipus and Prometheus as well. No one was an exception. Unlike the fierce outburst, Ares' true voice was unexpectedly calm. You have spoken more words than anyone I've seen. It happened the moment Heracles aimed a fist at me. 10 minutes had passed. Pluto appeared in the sky and blocked Heracles' fist. I literally flew through the air and entered Pluto's cockpit. The giant soldier Pluto has confirmed your boarding. The giant soldier Pluto has confirmed the Master's constellation. Your story will be assimilated with giant soldier Pluto. I was comfortably embraced by the giant soldier's body. It was like soft muscles were wrapped around my body and I could see the vision of the giant soldier. The power of the story weapon enveloped my entire body. This was one of the strongest story weapons of Ways of Survival, Giant Soldier Pluto. Ugh. Eek. Eek. I feel like there is a parasite in my stomach. As Kim Namwon was making a fuss, Han Soo-young spoke through Midday Tryst. Hey, can you do it? This is the giant soldier Heracles. You only have Kim Namwon. The rating of the giant soldier was determined by the quality of the soul used as the material of the giant soldier. In addition, the soul used for the original Pluto wasn't Kim Namwan. In other words, the current Pluto was much weaker than the original Pluto. Kim Namwan is pretty good. The situation is completely different from when you smashed the factory in the demon world. Do you think I don't know that? He can do it. You're serious? Perhaps it would be impossible originally, but I learned something from you. From me? I rushed towards Heracles. Heracles amplified his body volume to match Pluto and also headed towards me. Four hands collided and the fierce wind pressure created a whirlpool in the sea. Ares was surprised when Pluto showed a strength comparable to Heracles. A giant soldier? Where did you get it? I scammed it from someone, just like you. From the start of the Demon King selection to the 1863rd round, I had been preparing for Gigantomachia. It was a chance for a new nebula to establish a solid position and an opportunity to properly warn the big nebulae. Kim Doctor read and read Ways of Survival. I changed the original novel and the future became uncertain. However, it was impossible for me to use anticipation plagiarism like Han Soo-young of the 1863rd round. It was possible for writers like Han Soo-young to create possible developments of the future. To such a me, the 1863rd round Han Soo-young stated, "What are you talking about? You're a reader." Reader. A person who read and appreciated the writer's words. Author. Don't you think the research into the 12 gods is a bit lacking? Ares is more violent and looks down on humans more than depicted. Besides, the probability that the 12 gods can use individually. I was the one who made the story along with the writer. Heracles' fist slammed into Pluto's head and Pluto's fist struck Heracles' chest. In the ensuing melee, the feelings I felt while reading Ways of Survival flowed through me. I think the constellations who descended to the sub-scenario are too unfavorable. I wasn't a writer. I couldn't do it like Han Soo-young. However, more than anyone else, I was aware of the loopholes in the original work. Perhaps even more than the author who wrote the novel. The game ends here. The momentum around Heracles' body changed. The strength that shattered a lion's head was concentrated on both arms of the giant soldier and Heracles' star relic, Heracles' club was summoned. I had also prepared for the day when I would confront him. The giant storied demon world spring has begun. The status of a demon king is released. The power of a demon king mixed with electrification. On top of that, the giant story of Kim Dokja's company was placed. I exploded all the stories I had hidden. The stories I released were amplified to an enormous level due to Pluto's buff effect. Ares was greatly astonished. It was natural to be surprised. In fact, I was overdoing it. My status was still lacking to confront one of the 12 gods, but after going to the 95th scenario, I couldn't be compared to incarnations or constellations of the same grade. At the very least, I exceeded the limits of the 60th scenario. Your status is going beyond the limit of this scenario. Since the 60th scenario, the probability storm that occurred couldn't be compared to before. If I made a mistake, I might suffer a disaster where my incarnation body was destroyed. I endured the sparks with gritted teeth. The nebula Olympus has used too much extra probability on me. Therefore, the probability allowed for large-scale scenarios such as this Gigantomachia was almost gone. Indeed, Ares' status didn't rise above a certain level. Stupid fool. If you do that, you will die. I might die. I looked over at Ares and declared, but you will die first. I looked down at Pluto's empty right hand. The power of the giant soldier was so high that an ordinary weapon couldn't withstand the shock. At the very least, I needed a weapon comparable to Heracles' bat. In fact, I had such a weapon. It was a weapon I have been saving for a long time, just for this moment. Come, steel sword.